Hey everybody, it's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And this week my first question comes to me from King R. Farazan, who asks, "Hey Steve, I asked this question last time and it wasn't addressed. I just figure I'll try one more time before I conclude you hate me and my questions. I notice that you're obviously against very neoliberal conceptions of liberty, anti-governmentalism, pro-property rights, non-aggression principles, etc. What do you think about the role of modern Christianity in criticizing these ideas? You're reading Timothy Keller currently, who's very critical of these modern ideas about freedom, as are plenty of other Christian apologists who believe that freedom is much more nuanced than simply government out, markets in. Obviously, Pope Francis would also be a good example of this. Also, what do you think about religious socialism in the Middle East and Northern Africa as a means to combat neo-colonialism? Could you foresee a potential future where the traditional atheist left combines with the religious social ethics to combat the lunacy of strict free market capitalism?" Firstly, King R. Farazan, thank you for asking this question again. I almost answered it in the last video, but it just didn't quite make the cut. And you guys who ask me questions that I sometimes overlook, if you think it's a good enough question, or you're really that interested in hearing what I have to say about it, please always feel free to ask a question multiple times. Sometimes it's just a matter of I just couldn't fit it into the time of the previous video, and that's definitely the case with this question. I think it's an intriguing idea, the idea of secularism, or maybe some kind of democratic socialism that is secular in character, teaming up, as it were, with Christians, with Christian churches who are motivated to work for social justice. I think if Christianity in general and the Catholic Church in particular is interested in rehabilitating its image as a positive force in the world, it wants to do some real good for humanity, that's the way to do it, is to not only perform acts of social justice itself by running soup kitchens and operating charities and encouraging its followers, its members, to give to the less fortunate, but also to advocate for those sorts of behaviors to become social norms beyond the church. For better or worse, the church in general, and the Catholic Church in particular, is still a huge and hugely influential institution in our culture. And if the Catholic Church were to truly commit to not only helping the poor on its own, but also encouraging others to do that, to try and do what it can to make that sort of behavior, that sort of action, something that is expected of people who are able to do it, that would be a huge, huge positive thing. If the Catholic Church really wants to win back some of my respect, well, I don't think I should even say win back. I don't know if it ever really had that much. But if the Catholic Church wants to win the respect of atheists like myself, helping people in poverty lift themselves out of that poverty would be a good start. Helping them to resist economic exploitation would be a really great way of doing that. Missionary work that involves things other than handing out Bibles and baptizing people would be very, very welcome. And I mean, I don't know if I'll ever say that I expect the atheist left and the more religious organizations to combine, but I think I could definitely see them teaming up in this aspect. If religion and more secular organizations could ever have a common goal, the goal of just simple, practical human welfare, of lifting people up out of poverty, of giving people a chance to escape desperate poverty that so many people still live in throughout the world, that would be one of those areas, one of the best areas I could think of, where those two fronts could sort of converge and work toward a common goal, that despite our vast philosophical disagreements, we could agree on that and make some real positive headway. Deadbolt, I have a religion question for Millicent. Do Huskians consider wolves unfinished huskies in the same way some sects of Christians think of Jews? And what about half-husky mutts? Does being half-husky make them worthy of salvation, or is there some prohibition against miscegenation? Millicent has graciously agreed to join me to answer your question, so I'll just turn it over to her. She's seated right back here behind me. Millicent, what do you think about this question?
You show your ignorance. Wolves are not unfinished huskies. Huskies were created first by Husco himself, and all other species are lesser beings created to serve us. As for the half-husky mutts question, there is no place in heaven for mongrels.
All right, thanks, Millicent. Well, there you go. She didn't address it specifically, but I would presume from what she said that the answer to the question of is there a prohibition against miscegenation would be a big ol' yes. Tony Reed, hey Steve, even though you aren't a fan of Man of Steel, would you at least concede that they did the right thing in not having a Lois Lane moronically unable to distinguish between Superman and Clark Kent due to nothing more than a pair of glasses? You know, that sounds good, but keep in mind that it's not just Lois who is fooled by that disguise. I mean, she always takes the rap for it, and there was that funny episode of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman back in the 90s, where she was mocked openly by one of the villains for not recognizing that Clark and Superman were the same thing just because of the glasses. But it's not really fair to pin it just on Lois and say somehow that she's stupid for not getting it, because nobody gets it. The disguise fools pretty much everybody. And he is that version of Clark Kent at the end of the movie. I mean, Lois knows who he is, but presumably everybody else is going to see, oh, here's Clark Kent, the new reporter with the glasses. Oh, look, he's not Superman. I mean, it's going to fool everybody else anyway, so they really haven't changed that much. I would much rather have a Lois who doesn't recognize Superman through the flimsy Clark Kent glasses disguise, but who actually has an important role to play in the story and has a unique, particular character, as opposed to the way they use Lois in Man of Steel, which is basically the same way they used Commissioner Gordon in Batman Begins, in the role of just the generic sidekick. Oh, we need to have this character in the movie, but we don't really have anything for him to do. Let him just be the little buddy. That's how they used Gordon in Batman Begins. That's how they used Lois in Superman. In Man of Steel. Any other character could have done exactly the same things that she did. Her role was completely meaningless. I would much rather have a meaningful Lois who doesn't get that he's just wearing glasses than a meaningless Lois who sees through the disguise. That's just me. Kevin Nyberg, hey Steve, what are your thoughts on giving money to panhandlers? I ask because I'm generally a liberal-minded person when it comes to matters of poverty, but when someone on the street asks me for change, I normally say no. And it's even more rare for me to give anything to the people with the cardboard signs who beg at intersections. I tell myself that giving them money will only encourage them to continue that behavior, and I console myself with, well, maybe he's one of those scammers you hear about who pulls down $50K a year doing this shit. Or maybe they'll buy meth or liquor with it. But goddamn it, no matter what I tell myself to justify my behavior, I usually come away feeling guilty as fuck, because the reality is I could easily spare a couple bucks. And even if I can't afford to do that for every person that asks, at least I could have helped one or two. I know from other videos you've done that you're someone who considers the problems facing poor people, so I'm wondering what your philosophy is on panhandlers and how you deal with them when confronted. I will admit to you that I usually deal with them in the most cowardly way possible. And I'm not proud of it, and like you, I feel guilty about it, but if I see a panhandler in my path, I try to avoid them and just skirt the issue completely. If confronted with them, if I walk past somebody or someone comes up to me and directly asks me for money, usually if I have some to spare, I will give them something. But I will avoid that interaction if I see it coming and if I am able to, which I think is kind of a cowardly way to do it. And I do feel guilty about it, and I do feel like I probably should give somebody a little something. I mean, I don't get too hung up on the what ifs, what if he's a scammer? What if he just spends it on booze or drugs? I mean, of course, that seems like that's a possibility. These things happen. There's no guarantee that the person you give the money to is going to put it to its best possible use, but that doesn't really bother me. I mean, I don't feel like that's on me. I feel like that's on them. And I'm not that preoccupied with homeless people taking advantage of me that I worry about. Oh, what if he spends the money on something bad? The other thing I would say is whether you give money to panhandlers or not, the problem of homelessness, the problem of poverty, the problems that have driven these people to do this, to ask for change from passersby, and obviously I'm speaking of the ones who are legitimately in need, not the scammers, the circumstances that have driven them to that will not be solved by everybody just giving pocket change to panhandlers. There need to be more serious solutions tried at the institutional level, at the systemic level. And until that sort of thing is done, until there are more better social welfare programs targeted at homeless people that are funded well enough and staffed well enough to be able to reach everybody who needs them. It doesn't matter how much money you give the panhandlers you happen to pass by. It's not going to solve the underlying problem that has put them there in that situation in the first place. But even though I do believe that's the case, I do still feel guilty when I see someone like that and I don't give them something. Der Wunderbar Bar. When Man of Steel was released, there was an uproar over the fact that Superman killed General Zod by snapping his neck at the end of the movie. What I find funny is that people forget that Superman also killed Zod in Superman 2 in the original quadrilogy, and with more murderous glee than in Man of Steel. But no one really reacted to that when that movie was released. What do you feel about that? This is a prime example, I think, of the importance of tone. The difference between the death of General Zod in Superman 2 and the death of General Zod in Man of Steel is tone. Superman 2 is very lighthearted. It's more of a romp. It's not really meant to be taken seriously. It doesn't really want to be too heavy. It's clever. It's funny. It's charming. Whereas Man of Steel is none of those things. Man of Steel is not clever, it's not witty, it's not charming, it's not fun to watch. It's dreary disaster porn that lingers over its horrific violence while it's happening and then wants to have it the other way when it's over and pretend that it pretty much never happened. That's the difference. The difference is that Superman 2 is just has a much lighter tone that enables us to dismiss the act of violence that Superman commits to kill General Zod at the end. And also the presentation, tone and presentation. Superman in General Zod is killed in Superman 2 when he gets thrown into a wall and falls into a pit full of fog. General Zod dies in Man of Steel by having his neck broken moments away from him murdering a family of people after he and Superman have already unwittingly teamed up to murder untold thousands of people by punching each other through buildings in Metropolis. So the presentation and the tone of those two General Zod deaths is completely different. And that's why I think the one in Superman 2, to me and to a lot of people, is much more palatable and much more acceptable than the one as we see presented in Man of Steel. Firefly 4F4. Hopefully this makes it to the video in time for your next episode. Otherwise, I'll ask it again next time. How do you deal with people who insist you must respect their opinion? I've recently encountered people, in particular those who don't support gay marriage, who feel that because they hold an opinion, that opinion itself deserves some kind of respect. Personally, I see no reason any opinion deserves respect unless it can be backed up with sound reasoning. I do often hear people use a phrase like, well, that's my opinion, as though that statement itself is some sort of justification for any opinion you might hold. And like you, I just don't see it that way. I draw a distinction between respecting a person's right to hold an opinion and respecting the opinion itself. I respect people's right to hold any opinion they might hold. You have the right to hold that opinion. I respect that, and I think it's important to respect that in other people. I think it's just a basic courtesy. It's a basic part of our social contract. People have the right to think whatever they think and to believe whatever they believe and to hold whatever opinions they want, and I respect that right. But that does not mean I respect your opinion. If your opinion is something that I judge to be bigoted, if your opinion is something that I judge to be based on a false belief, then it's not just that I don't respect it, I can't respect it. I'm incapable of respecting it. The definition of respect means nothing if I can say, I think that what you're saying is completely unethical and offensive and vulgar and bigoted and monstrous, but I respect your opinion. No, I don't respect your opinion. If you think that same-sex couples don't have the right to get married, I do not respect your opinion. Because I don't think there's any reason for anyone to hold that opinion. I respect your right to hold it. I respect the fact that you think it's a good opinion to have, that it makes sense to you. I respect that. But I don't respect the opinion. And you don't respect my opinion. If you, let's take the atheism and theism thing. If you are a born-again Christian, incredibly devout, convicted believer in God, and I am an atheist who thinks there is no such thing as God, you don't respect my opinion on the matter of God's existence, and I don't respect yours, because we each think that the other is wrong. Now, hopefully, we respect each other's right to hold the opinion, and hopefully we're able to discuss the subject in a way that is respectful and productive and moves toward trying to understand each other and find some sort of common ground or common understanding or just have a nice, fun, friendly conversation. But we don't respect each other's opinions. How can I respect an opinion that I think is wrong? It's ridiculous. The key is respecting the right of people to hold opinions, not to respect opinions or to pretend that you respect opinions, to affect a phony respect for opinions that you think are bullshit. Here's one from Jason Konis. Here's a question for you, which is something that I have been debating a friend about for the past couple days. You know more about screenwriting than I do. I would like your input. I will leave my own thoughts out of it, as I do not want anybody to accuse me of swaying your opinion if you happen to agree with me. Do you think a trilogy, such as Back to the Future, would be considered one story in 3 parts or counted as 3 different movies? Should a trilogy be considered 1 movie or 3? I think in the case of Back to the Future, and also in general, in most cases, a trilogy should be considered 3 movies, not 1 movie. The reason I say that, first of all, with the case of Back to the Future, I think if you watch the movies, it's obvious that you're not dealing with 3 chapters of 1 movie. You're dealing with 3 separate movies. You're dealing with a movie and a sequel and a second sequel. That's what the Back to the Future trilogy is. It's not a continuous saga. One picks up where the last one left off, but they're clearly self-contained movies, and one is a sequel to the one before it. And I'm just a big believer, and this is just my personal taste as a writer, as an audience member, as a critic, whatever. I believe that form should determine content to a degree. And I think that if you are writing a movie, which is a standalone work, then your story should start at the beginning of the movie and be over at the end of the movie. It doesn't mean that you can't make more movies with the same character or more movies that pick up on threads from that story. I mean, things like Back to the Future and Star Wars and Star Trek movies and Harry Potter and all that. I mean, some of those are really great movies and are really great trilogies or series. There's nothing wrong with that. But as a writer, I want to have a finished movie. When I start on page 1 and I finish on page, let's just say 120, I want that to be a self-contained, complete story. And if I come back to this particular well and I write a sequel to this story, I want that to be a self-contained, complete story. If you are writing an episode of television, if you're writing a TV series, and you are working in the format of 1-hour episodes, I think you need to tell stories that can be told within that 1-hour episode. I'm not a huge fan of serial storytelling on television. I'm just not. It's just, I mean, I can't say that it's never been done well. There have been TV shows that have done serialized storytelling very well, but in general, my taste is if you're making a TV series and your episodes are 1 hour each or 30 minutes each or whatever, your stories should fit within that space. If your stories don't fit within that space, you're telling them in the wrong medium. You're telling them in the wrong form. That's just the way I look at it. Now, I know that you could argue the other way if you wanted to say that, well, the Back to the Future trilogy is actually one continuous work that was just broken up into three pieces. It's one movie instead of three. You could point to things like how Back to the Future 2 ends and Back to the Future 3 begins with Marty and Doc back in 1955 and the DeLorean up in the air, and being thrown back into the Old West when it gets struck by lightning. But you know what? I guess maybe that's a sign that I've answered this question enough. And that it's time to move on to
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
Dangerously Talented. What is your favorite fictitious adaptation of the god Thor? Are there other kinds of adaptations of Thor? To answer your question, it would be The Incredible Hulk Returns. Piker Eyes. Have you ever played Dungeons & Dragons or similar imagination-based games? Personally, I find them to be a lot of fun, but most of the time it is an excuse to spend time with my friends and goof off. Is it the boring fantasy storylines, the make-believe, or are you just not a big tabletop board game person? I've never actually played Dungeons & Dragons. All I can remember about Dungeons & Dragons personally is I used to have some of my friends in middle school and high school were into it, and occasionally they would play it at parties, and it just always seemed like the most boring waste of time to me. I would stand there and watch them playing and think, what is the fucking point of this? It's probably similar to how some people view pro wrestling and wonder why I can be such a fan of pro wrestling. So it's probably one of those things. Charles Kunkel. Steve, you probably have had this one before, but what's your take on free will? Personally, I don't believe that everything is determined, or even that humans are 100% determined by biology, early training, and such, but that whatever free will we do have is strictly limited by those factors. I would buy that. I think that sounds reasonable. My thing about free will is, and Richard Dawkins, I think, has said this before as well, if we don't have free will, if the universe is actually deterministic, then the illusion that we do have free will is so incredibly convincing that it only makes sense to live our lives as though we do have it. And that's pretty much where I fall on it too. Dev Shell 2, if you had 2 apples and I had 2 oranges and the wind is blowing eastward at 15 miles per hour, how many aliens would it take to screw in a light bulb? Oh shit. I used to know this. 43. Logical, oh wait. You said 15 miles an hour? 42. 42. Logical Cake. I know you don't follow the NFL, but this is important. Broncos or Seahawks? And why is it the Broncos? Let me try to explain it to you this way. If you could imagine that the entire universe was a sheet of paper and you could pick up the universe at all 4 corners and pull it into the center and fold it and form it into a cup, that cup made from the entirety of the universe would still not have enough volume to contain all the fucks I don't give. Peter McLaughlin. Steve, do you have a party affiliation? I am a registered Democrat. I think the party in its present form is the lesser of two evils, but I want to vote in primaries in my state, and I am a party member because it gives me the option to have a say in at least one party's candidate. That may not be an issue in a state that allows independents to vote in primaries, but I think in states where you need to join a party to get more of a say, I don't think it's a good move to be an independent. I see that point of view, but personally, I'm registered unaffiliated. Here in Maryland, you're allowed to register unaffiliated, and that means I don't get to vote in primaries. Only Republicans or Democrats get to vote in primaries. And the way I look at it is, if I'm not a Democrat or I'm not a Republican, it doesn't really bother me that I don't get to vote in Democratic or Republican primaries. I definitely see the other side of it. I understand why you might want to have a voice in choosing the candidate no matter what, but personally, I'm happy being unaffiliated. DZOSU71. Steve, I hope I'm not too late with this question to get it into the next episode. As I'm sure you know, the Three Stooges have never gotten the respect they truly deserve. Please tell me you're a Stooge fan. And if so, which is your favorite Stooge? I am a Stooge fan. It's funny. I went through a period when I was a little kid. I thought the Stooges were hilarious. Then I grew up and I was like a sort of a teenager and a young adult, and I didn't get it anymore. I didn't think the Stooges were funny. I would watch them and think, what the fuck? And then about 5 years ago, I went to visit my dad, and he was watching the Three Stooges as I walked in, and I watched a few minutes of it with him. And it was the first time in years I had seen the Stooges. And it was the funniest shit I had seen in a long time. I stood there and just laughed my fucking ass off. So I would say, at this moment, I am once again a fan of the Three Stooges. And my favorite was always Shemp. I don't know. I love Shemp. Cracks me up. Hey, that is it for the questions this week. But before I get out of here, I want to give a shout out. And the shout out this week goes to an awesome channel called TheAtheistChef. The Atheist Chef is what I would call a really good meat and potatoes atheist vlogger. I love a good vlogger. He's a guy who just sits in front of his webcam and he speaks on a whole variety of topics. He's got videos talking about science, talking about philosophy, talking about creationism, a little bit about the presuppositional argument. Check out his channel. It's awesome stuff. He's an incredibly articulate, intelligent guy, and he makes really great content. And I just love it's like old school YouTube. It's like a smart person sitting in front of their webcam and telling you what's on their mind in a really articulate, interesting way. And I could watch his shit for a long time, and I have spent some time watching it, and it's a really excellent channel, and I think you should all check it out. The Atheist Chef. Not many subs at this point, deserving of a lot more, so let's make that happen, shall we? That's it for this week. I will be back next week to do this all over again, provided, of course, that you guys ask me some questions, because in order for me to do this, you have to ask. So leave a comment on this video. Ask me your question. Ask me anything about anything. Whatever you want to hear me talk about, whatever you want to know my opinion on, it doesn't matter. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of them as I can in the next video. So until then, I will see you guys. Take care.